You can decide, like, hey, I recognize this person. They're a whole human being, not just whatever I initially see or how they speak or how they dress. Like, they're just another human like me. I can choose to see them as a whole individual, or I can choose not to.
Welcome to Latinx Can, a podcast showcasing Latinx professionals who turn their dreams into realities. I'm your host, La Doctora Jenire Flores Delgado, and today I'm here with Dr. Linet Mera, co-founder of the Unconscious Bias Project, a nonprofit that uses scientifically backed tools and approaches to drive systems change. And she is here to tell you, sí se puede, my friends, sí se puede. Dr. Linet Mera, welcome to Latinx Can.
Hi, thank you so much for welcoming me, Jenny, and for inviting me to come speak on your awesome podcast.
Oh, thank you for the feedback. That's great. But I'm very excited about talking about not just your story, but also about the work that you do, which is incredibly important. So let's start by talking a little bit about your story and where your story begins.
Before we get into it, I do want to say I'm currently in Berkeley in the Bay Area, and it's unceded ancestral homeland that belongs to the Chochenyo, Ramaytush, and Muwekma Ohlone people. So I just wanted to put that out there first. I think one of the things that we forget sometimes when we're just listening to ourselves on audio is that we're on actual, real ancestral homelands of other people. And so I did want to bring that up. And I think that also connects a little bit to my story. So I am from Bogota, Colombia. I'm born to my parents. My mom and my dad came from basically single-parent households. And they were sort of one of very few people that had the opportunity to go to college in their families, and they're both engineers. So that's like my background. Both my parents were very smart. Mm-hmm. And so I was born in Colombia, and I grew up actually in 5 different countries. I grew up in Nigeria, in France, in Venezuela. I also, grew up a little bit in Colombia, and I also grew up in the States. And the thing that moved me around so much is my dad worked in the oil industry. Mm-hmm. Colombia is unfortunately notorious for not having very good job security. Mm-hmm. And so the only way to have stable income and job security is if you're working with a non-inside Colombia type of company, like a multinational company. So my dad actually had wanted to be a physics teacher, but they were talking about starting a family and being able to provide for us the things that they couldn't have, and so that was sort of what the decision that my dad made. And I mention all these pieces because there are folks that are listening can't see me, but I am a very white passing woman of color, and I actually recently found out that I have indigenous ancestry.
Oh, wow.
But of course, I can't trace it. Mm-hmm. So I share, I think, over 40% of my genetic markers with other indigenous people from Colombia and Peru. But of course, nobody's going to admit that, right? So it was interesting sort of, growing up around the world, being Colombian. My parents knew how important learning English was. And so my mom was actually the one who taught me English at the same time as I was learning Spanish. So I would learn the colors, amarillo, azul, y rojo, and then I would learn them in English, like yellow, blue, and red. And I grew up in, going to school in lots of different schools. Like in Nigeria, I was in a British international school for expats. In France, I went to an actual French school. So I learned French when I was in France. I went to school in French. When I was in Venezuela, I was in a bilingual American school, which is a trip. And then in Colombia, I was actually a private Catholic school. So that's another trip. And in the States, when we finally landed in the States, we landed in Texas, which is like another country.
Yes.
And in the outskirts of Houston. And there I went to a public school. And that was like a whole nother experience. And so, you know, I think all of these different contexts, sort of this, the background that I have, I don't know if I mentioned, but I'm the palest one in my family. I'm like the rana platanera, you know, in Mexico, they say the güerita, like I was literally the palest one in my family. And I swear I had like trigueña skin, like, you know, like light brown skin until I moved to France where it was cold. And so I was never out in the sun that much. And I was like, oh, I'm pale.
Yes.
Yeah. So anyway, so all of this to say, like, I think until I became a teenager, right, coming of age, I didn't really notice that I was different. I didn't feel different from anybody else. I just, you know, I'm gonna, you know, go play here with my friends. I'm gonna go, you know, learn at a new school, and, you know, traveling and learning, you know, bits about different languages and different cultures, trying different foods was part of growing up. It didn't feel like that strange. And so I wasn't really aware that people thought about each other any differently, really, like not even through nationalities or ethnicities, but definitely not by race. I think until I went back to Colombia as a teenager. So to set the context, I was, you know, I had my pink Barbie backpack. I had my pink rimmed glasses. I was like excited to learn. I was a total nerd. Like I loved reading and learning about things since I was like really little. I wanted to be a scientist. I saw this on like National Geographic. Dr. Eugene Clark, which is one of the major ichthyologists in the field. And I was like, oh my gosh, I want to study sharks. Like, this is so cool. I want to be a marine biologist.
Oh, that's amazing.
I was 100% nerd from the get-go. So I arrive at this private Catholic school in Colombia, in Chía. So it's on the outskirts of Bogota, if you will. And these peers of mine were talking about having sex and shaving their legs. And I was 10. I was like, wow, what is happening here? I cannot, that moment was the biggest culture shock in my life. Like Nigeria, France, nothing. Venezuela, no culture shock. This was like the biggest culture shock in my life. And I got othered because I liked school and I was quiet and I liked to read and I could speak English without an accent. And it was really sad, looking back, and of course I came into the school and I was the only person that didn't have any other connections there. Right. So I think it was really easy to other me, and, just kids just do this. And I think I described this setting, this being bullied, which it was pretty unfortunate. I broke both my wrists while I was there. I suffered sexual harassment from another classmate, and I struggled to talk about. I couldn't figure out what the words were. I didn't have the language to describe what was happening to me, and it was really hard. And then because of other reasons, so the reason why we were in Colombia was my dad was trying to leave the oil industry because. Don't get me started. That's like another podcast. But he was trying to leave Colombia. Trying to leave the oil industry. So he went back to Colombia, tried a few different businesses and it didn't work out. So then he went back into the oil industry. So we went back to Venezuela at that point. We went back to a school where I had been up until recently. And I was the exact same person as I was, the same kid that was being bullied in Colombia. I moved back to this other school and I was instantly popular. And this sort of juxtaposition of being the outcast and then being suddenly the most popular person, wreaked havoc on my teenage mind. But I think is really the nucleus of how I move in the world and what brought me to my work now, which is just noticing inclusion is a choice. To include somebody in your games, to include somebody in your lunchtime is a choice. And so you deciding somebody else is talking funny about this person, that I'm going to do that too. That is a choice, right? Yeah. And I really think that's sort of spoiler alert for people that are listening, I work in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's really at the crux of everything of, it's choices that we make when we don't accept people that speak with accents in our groups. It's a choice that we make when we don't ask somebody that's a parent to join you for a happy hour. It's you can decide like, hey, I recognize this person. They're a whole human being, not just whatever I initially see or how they speak or how they dress. Like they're just another human like me. They have interests like me. They have pains like me. I can choose to see them as a whole individual, or I can choose not to.
I think that's a great realization to have, especially at such an early age, because I think my experience as well, and I didn't leave Venezuela until I was close to being 18. So for the most part, even though we all look different, like I'm the darkest in my family, closer to my dad's side of the family. But if you see my mom, she's completely white, and we don't look like we are related. In fact, there's like my sister and I, we don't look like we are related. And we used to go to this sports club that my dad plays tennis at all the time. And this time we were not with my dad, and I had forgotten my card to get in. And my sister had hers, and she was driving. So we go through to the checkpoint, and the guard asks us for our cards. And I said, I don't have mine, but my sister has hers, and we're sisters. And the guy looks at me and at my sister, and they're like, I don't think so. I don't think you guys are related. And we're like, it's for sure. It's true. I know we are, I'm darker than my sister, but we are from the same mother and from the same father as well. But anyway, I mean, they let us in. But what I'm trying to say is that I grew up in this homogeneous atmosphere, even though we look different from each other. Mm-hmm. But when I went to study in Swaziland, that's when people were really different from me. It was people from different nationalities, different countries, different races, different cultures, right? Yeah. And I spent 2 years there, and then I went back home. And like you said, it was the biggest cultural shock to go back home after having lived that experience, because you think differently, because you see things differently. And I remember one time I was sitting with my dad and his friends at the sports club, and we were talking about my experience. And my dad's friends were talking about how in Swaziland they have such a high rate of AIDS. And so they were shunning the country because of that. And they were also, I was commenting that King Mswati is a polygamous king. And he had at the time maybe like 14 wives or something like that. Wow. And I was trying to explain that having many wives and many kids would be a sign of status. And hence why they also have a very high rate of AIDS in the country, because they don't believe in protection, because then you can't have children, then you can't show your status. So I was going through that rabbit hole, and they were like, oh, how ignorant it is to have so many children or something like that. And I was like, you know what? For them, they are showing their status by having children. But we do the same. We only buy houses and cars that are a lot more expensive than we can afford. Yeah. It's no different. We just show it in different ways. But just having that realization in that moment is like, wow, like everything is so much different from just having lived that experience just 2 years abroad and just understanding different points of view, right?
Yeah. I hear you saying, like, you understood that the values were the underpinning that made some of the sort of AIDS transmission prevention really challenging. And yeah, I think that's really key is understanding values and sort of accepting, like, okay, others have different values from me, and that's just the way it is. Sort of like,
yeah, exactly.
It's not like right or wrong. It's not left or right. But I think, you're totally right. And it's part of what I think is underneath a lot of fears that people have about the other, right? Like they're just so different, or they don't understand, or they don't value the things that are important. It's just, they have different, like if you would say like, oh, well, because Venezuelans, don't have, a bunch of children, then they don't value family. Like, that's not true, right? It's just like valuing family is a completely different thing, and it's shown in different ways, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So I think that's really critical. When I came to the U.S., I landed in the U.S., I think I just turned 15. And I came into a public high school, and it was such everything was a culture shock. Like this is Texas, so there was, in Bogota and Chia, like all the houses are close together, all the streets are small, and in Texas, driving from the airport, they're just like, I don't even know how to explain it, but like miles of cars that are in parking in lots, because those are where people sell cars. Like the car sales area that I knew of were maximum like half a city block. Like that's it. Like those were the big ones. But it was it was in Texas that I had probably some of the worst experiences with racism. As soon as people learned that my parents were from Colombia, I remember this one time a kid like my age was like, "Oh, you're from Colombia? Can you, Dad, score me some cocaine?" I was just shocked, because for us in Colombia, growing up after, La Violencia, which ended-ish like right around when I was born, and seeing the real cost of the drug trade and las FARC and all the guerrilla and the the internal strife, and what drug use did to people, how guerrilla would force farmers to stop cultivating what they were cultivating in order to grow cocaine, in order to grow pot, things that they could trade. If you didn't stop whatever you're growing to grow, these drug crops, they would kill you. They would kill your family, and they would do it in front. Like it's everybody knows that. Like it's not something like, oh, I happened to hear. Everybody knows that. You ask anybody, like they know what it was like. Yeah, I was livid. I remember I was totally livid. My sibling got kicked out of their girlfriend's house, being called, and trigger warning for folks out there, I'm about to say a racial slur, being called a wetback.
Oh, wow.
He was like, "You dirty wetback, get out of this house." And it was just like, what is even happening here? Yeah. And when I went to college, I ended up going to college in Texas A&M. I knew nothing really about colleges, other than, we've heard of Baylor, we've heard of MIT, but those were really far. And so the only other ones that people were talking about were UT Austin and Texas A&M. Correct, yeah. And Texas A&M was close, and I missed some deadline or some like letter of reference for UT Austin. I remember when I was at Texas A&M, I did a lot of work actually with international groups. I started a language learning institute. I was part of the Colombian student organization there. But I was doing that at a time when this was right after 9/11. And so there were literally emails going out like almost every month to students, like, please walk in groups, because we're getting reports of anybody with headscarves or, that might have some sort of Muslim garb associated with them, getting hit behind the head with a baseball bat by other students in pickup trucks. So if you don't know Texas A&M, this is like only for universities. So it's a college town.
It's a college town.
It's a college town. Like there's nothing else out there other than these colleges. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay, this is terrible. And, I was one of the small groups of people that would protest against the counter protesters that were protesting on Gay Pride Day on campus.
Texas A&M is another chalk for me, because I was coming from the University of Florida, where I was an international student at the University of Florida, and a lot of my friends came from UWC, which is the schools that I went to when I was in Eswatini in Swaziland. So I had this group of very international people. And then I had a very, very large Latino population, Latinx population coming from Colombia, Venezuela, and then Cuba as well. A lot of representation from different countries that, in contrast to Texas, is mostly Mexico, right? So when I went to Texas A&M, I've said this before, I was like, making the choice to go to UF was a very intentional choice in which I wanted to be surrounded by Latinx people, because I missed it for 2 years. I missed it a lot, and I wanted to broaden my experience, but I also wanted to stay connected to my roots. So that was my intention. When I applied to grad school, I forgot that that was not something that I could find everywhere. And I did not think about that when I went to Texas A&M. And when I arrived, I was in shock. I was like, wow, this is a totally different place. I did not expect this to be like this. But I mean, I think you adapt, but those things that you're mentioning happening right after 9/11, I can only imagine how people felt and how insecure it was for people who would just wear a headscarf. It didn't mean more than just wearing something. Like, it represents your culture, it represents your values, but it's just people mistaking that thing that they can see from you and just portraying you as a threat to them. But most recently, it was maybe a couple of years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, just before I graduated with my PhD, they passed a law that they allowed people at the university to carry guns.
Oh my gosh, I remember that.
And what was so terrifying, Linet, is that the law passes and people start carrying guns. And for the most part, I didn't really feel threatened because I didn't teach anymore. So I was just in my office and doing my PhD. But they sent an email because a professor was threatened by a student. And this professor was of Arabic descent. And it was just, nothing happened. But they did say that some student had come into their office with a gun and they had threatened them. And I just read that. And at that moment, I had to leave. I had to go home because I could not understand how in this first world country, I have to fear about somebody not even wanting to steal my shoes, just having some ill feelings because of the person that they think I am, not even because of the person I am. And I had to pack up and go. So like thinking about how this was the same years ago, it's like, it's disheartening that not much has changed.
Wow. I'm so sorry. That sounds like an absolutely horrifying experience. Yeah.
It was terrible. It was, I mean, I'm okay, but I just never thought that was something that I was going to live here.
So right now, for folks that are listening, we're recording in July of 2021. It's still, Black Lives Matter is still really fresh in everybody's minds. People are still have very recent memories of the attacks in DC towards Congress people. Like, we're still thinking about that. And there have been still, even though people are trying to stay home and whatnot, there's been a lot of violence, and specifically gun violence, directed against people of color. Continued and worsened gun violence towards Black folks, Latinx folks, First Nations people, Asian American, Pacific Islander. It just sort of continues, and I've never understood, this whole guns thing, like, oh, well, if you had a gun, then you would be able to defend yourself. The problem is that if you are not white, if you own a gun, then you are a threat, right? It's like the whole gun ownership piece even still has way, roots into slavery and colonialism and this sort of like fear, right? There is this whole thing is like, you're going to fear that, they're going to take away your jobs. They're going to take away your wives. They're going to take away your resources. And I think that's very much still at the crux of a lot of where, white supremacy still gains hold and, our inequitable systems still function. And, the way in which, still a lot of conservative pundits gather support, gather money and resources and people to support their cause is this idea of fear. And I think, folks like you and me, we've had the chance to meet a wide variety of people, to experience a wide variety of cultures. And I think, I'll speak for myself, but, I just see so much commonality. I see, there are a lot of differences in our different, even Colombia and Venezuela, like we're so close to each other. We're very different cultures. And even within Venezuela and within Colombia, like there's so many different subcultures, depending if you're in the city, if you're in the rural lands, if you live near the Amazons, if you are in the mountain area. It's just, even the way we speak our languages, the way we dance, the kind of foods we eat, everything it can be really different. And I find that difference exciting and interesting, and it's what I try to bring into my work. And as opposed to fear-based, right? Like if you live in fear, if you're like tense all the time, like, am I going to do the wrong thing? Like, if you're a white person, you never interacted with somebody that's Black, for example. There are still places like that. Lots of European countries don't have a very large population of Black people, for example. You're worried, like, I don't know if I'm going to say the right thing. Just be open. It's just like, open, curious, like, there's so much to learn, to connect. Like everybody is unique and different. And that's great. That's like a wonderful thing. And, being scared of like, oh, they're going to take away something. It's like, no, we're living in this idea of like, there's scarcity. Well, there's not enough jobs, or there's not enough money, or, if you create this, national program for people to help, I don't know, Latinx youth get into college, then my kid won't get into college. Like, there's actually a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of resources. We're not, especially in the U.S., it's not a situation where like, the economy is tanked and there's no growth. Like that's not the setting. It's not like there's not enough land in the U.S. to have a home. That's not the case.
I understand what you're saying, because it's not our fault or people's fault that they have not interacted or that they have not been exposed to other people. But when you are, it is your fault if you don't take advantage of the opportunity. And like you said, staying curious and asking about it. I don't always know everything, but knowing that you don't know everything and that you are there to learn. I think I listened to Brené Brown, and one of the things that one of her mantras is, I'm not here to get it right. I can't forget. I'm not here to get it right. I'm not here to be right. I am here to learn, or something like that. And I think it's about that. It's about going in with an open mind and knowing that, I think very important it is knowing that you can learn something else, that you're not in that interaction to come and teach people or to minimize other people, but it is an exchange in which we can both learn from each other. And I think that that's really important, knowing that it's not your fault not to be exposed to those situations, but if you do have the option and the opportunity, then you should take advantage of it.
Exactly. How you approach, how you take advantage of the opportunity. I think that's really key.
Let me talk a little bit about Texas A&M, because you mentioned that you didn't really know much when you were to apply for college, and the cost of going to university in the United States is astronomous. It's so it's a big impediment for people to aspire to get a college education. And even though your parents are professionals, I can imagine that there it could be a challenge even for a family of professionals. Do you find any scholarships or any opportunities that helped you get through college?
Yeah, so in the States, it's so key to have a college counselor or a teacher that can help guide you. We didn't have that. And I know now that my high school counselor didn't recommend me she never even mentioned advanced placement courses, which are so important because I don't know how it is now in Texas, but back then, your GPA was capped if you didn't take advanced placement courses. But if you take advanced placement courses, then you can have a much higher GPA than if you just went to regular classes. I didn't know that. And I 100% think that they put me in the non-advanced category. Didn't even talk about that because I'm Latina. Right? Like, I'm not supposed to be smart. I'm not supposed to be interested in chemistry or anything like that. So I just sort of figured those things out on my own. And my parents and I did the research. You said family professionals, but my dad was the only one that really kept the job because they moved around so much. My mom wasn't able to continue her work because she would have to get a work visa every time. So she did do some running businesses where we were in Colombia, and they started dabbling in real estate when they were in Texas. So when I was getting ready to apply for colleges, I had just gotten a green card. Like, I had just been told that I would be awarded a green card. I didn't have it in hand, which made things really difficult because most universities don't recognize you as a permanent resident until all of that paperwork is done, until you have a number you can point to. Having the official card, letter from the government is not enough. So it was really challenging to find, to find financial aid because a lot of them required that you have a permanent residency in order to be able to access any sort of scholarship. So I think we got really lucky in that A&M was able to offer a half ride, really was what it ended up being. And that was through, and I think I applied for everything. I think I remember I applied for a Coca-Cola scholarship. I applied for everything that I could search on the internet at the time.
Yes. Yeah.
Because, my high school counselor was crap, right?
Yeah.
So I just applied to everything I could. And really the decision to end up going to Texas A&M it was one of the schools that didn't force me to pray when they brought us to visit.
Wow.
I'm atheist. My parents are atheists. And I don't have there's nothing wrong with religion. I think religion's really powerful and really supports lots of people through their lives. And, if they need it to have good values and morals, great, do your thing.
Yeah.
But I don't feel like I need to have to pray in order to be a good person.
Right.
Anyways, so one, it was one of the few universities that didn't require prayer when I went to go interview. Two, it was one of the few universities that did offer me a scholarship. And so I got the academic achievement scholarship that was a half ride.
Okay.
But outside of that, I didn't qualify for anything else. Basically, I got shunted for not being a permanent resident. And I didn't know. We didn't know that much about what was out there. And then A&M was in driving distance from my parents because my parents were in Katy, and so this was an hour and a half drive.
Yeah,
I think if I remember correctly.
Yeah, no, about 2 hours ish. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I mean that's so important because in our community, we have so many people that are undocumented, but are also wanting to pursue their goals. And there are opportunities out there. We just have to really look for them. It's not, what I'm trying to say is that it is hard, but it's not impossible. And it's one of those things that we want to do in this podcast is try to highlight those opportunities that are available so that people can actually fulfill their dreams. This is, it's like I said, it's challenging, but it's not impossible. And I think for other people to know that somebody like you and me, not really having any roots in this country, we can still do it. I think this is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things, we talked a bit about opportunities is every time there was an opportunity, I try to take it. So there was this scholarship. So I was like, okay, let's do it. Like, I didn't know anything about Texas A&M, but I'm going to go there. I started an undecided major because I wasn't sure if I wanted to go into arts or into science.
Yeah.
And so I took I took a liberal arts 101 course. I took a sociology course, and I took a genetics 101 course. And I had a really good science teacher. And so I ended up going that route. But I feel like, it just kept on being opportunities that opened. So with the scholarship that I got, A&M had a sort of leadership program that would connect other scholarship recipients to each other and sent us to Italy. I think the idea was to learn about leadership, but I don't remember anything about leadership. I just remember about the trip, which was amazing.
To compete with Rome and things like that,
But like that, I took it. I had this good genetics professor, so I chose to do science instead. I tried actually to do bioinformatics, which is what I literally remember my dad and I opening a book on degrees. And we're like, okay, what are science degrees that sound cool? Okay, this one. Because my dad's, engineer. He doesn't know anything about molecular biology, biochemistry, genetics, none of that, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, bioinformatics. I'm going to search bioinformatics in the courses. There wasn't a course on bioinformatics, but there was a lab. And so I was like, okay, I want to join your lab. And it was really boring, so I didn't do bioinformatics. But there was another lab that was open on bacteriophage genomics. This is Dr. Young, who's still at A&M, I think, and Dr. Summer, and they were open and they were happy to teach undergrads, and so I did that, and that was awesome, and I loved being in the lab. I learned about sequences, and I curated genomes, and it was really fun. And because Dr. Young taught this graduate level course on bacteriophage, that was his jam. I wanted to learn about bacteriophage. And so he's like, yeah, you can totally come and take the class. And so I did. I took that opportunity and I did that. And because I was so interested in lab and I really enjoyed my molecular biology class, I started talking to my teachers, my professors, yeah, I'm really interested. And I was friends with a bunch of the international engineers at this, nerd. And that was my crew. And they were all doing internships in their third and fourth years. And so I was like, okay, I want to do an internship. I want to do that too. That sounds great. And I'm a total anime nerd. And so I was like, I want to go to Japan. I want to experience Japan. It would be really cool. And so by just connecting to the professors there, and I remember I told Dr. who unfortunately passed away, I think it was last year or 2 years ago, Dr. who was my molecular biology teacher. I was like, yeah, I'm doing this lab work with Dr. Young, and it's really great, but I really want to do an internship like my friends are doing in engineering, and I want to go to Japan, and it would be really cool, but I haven't found one. I joined IESTA. It was an international association for the science, technology, and engineering exchange, something like that, where you could get placed in internships around the world. And I told him about I joined this thing, but I couldn't find an internship for science. He's like, I have a friend in Japan. Let me reach out to him. And he did, and I landed an internship in Japan, paid internship in Japan with housing. At a graduate research institute. It's called NAIST in Nara and Japan. And it was amazing. And actually being in Japan in this internship the professor that I was working for there, Dr. Mori, he's like, have you thought about graduate school? I noticed you really like your, the research that you're doing. Have you thought about graduate school? It's like, no, I didn't. I never considered that I could go to graduate school.
Yeah.
Here I was taking advanced, graduate school courses, working in a lab. And he's like, have you thought about going to graduate school? I was like, no. And he's like, where would you want to go? I was like, can I work with you? You're great. And he's like, for your career, you should really go to, do science in the States. That's the best way to set yourself up for your career. So here is a guy that I met through a professor that I happened to go to this school because they happened to offer me a half-ride scholarship and it was close enough to my parents' house. And the only reason why I even talked to the professor in the first place was because I tried a Genetics 101 class that was awesome. And the only reason that I got to Japan is because I talked to that professor about wanting to go to Japan and that I like doing science. And I wouldn't have had this conversation with this professor in Japan if it hadn't been for me going to Japan, just going and try. I was there by myself. There was nobody else there. It's just me. And really wanting to learn and do my best to learn out there. And he was the one that suggested I go to school in San Francisco. He was like, have you heard of UCSF? I'd never heard of it ever before. And he's like, yeah, my colleague there, Dr. Carol Gross, you should totally talk to her. And she is like one of the foremost microbiologists, molecular biologists in the world. She studies the heat shock response, and it was super cool. And so that's how I ended up going to graduate school.
Yeah.
Are just like a series of opportunities, and I just took them. And of course, exactly. I worked hard, but I didn't get there by myself, right? If my dad hadn't made that choice to, work in the oil industry so we'd have opportunities, right? Like that wouldn't have been available. If I wasn't, pale enough of skin, I probably would have been looked over for a lot of opportunities.
Exactly.
I didn't get there just by hard work. It was just like these opportunities are open because of all of these different situations. And, it does take hard work to find them. It does take hard work to do them.
Yeah.
But there was like, I wasn't alone, right? This is all what landed me to UCSF.
So that was part 1 of this episode. Come back in 2 weeks to listen to part 2, where Dr. Mera gives us concrete examples of tools we can use to help us address unconscious biases. Thank you for listening. If you want to put a face to the voices you just heard, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at LatinxScan. If you have questions or feedback, you can email us at latinxscan@gmail.com. And if you want to support our project, please leave a review. We have made it easy for you and added the links to the show notes. That's it for now. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and remember, unidos somos más.